In recent years, I have talked extensively about Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, in one of my books, I mentioned that I am a devotee. I am a huge fan of Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, this is not to say that I agree with everything he had to say. In fact, my philosophy is somewhat the opposite in relation to what Jean-Paul Sartre was saying. But Jean-Paul Sartre was a very despised thinker. Now, we're not going to go into the details as to why he was despised, but the fact remains that he was very despised. And as I point out in one of my books, it's this idea that Sartre was a punching bag, okay? And everybody wanted a piece of him. Everybody wanted to criticize him. In fact, if you did a quick research, you would mostly come across pieces that refute Jean-Paul Sartre, rather than finding pieces that acknowledges his capacity, his intellectual, his contribution to human literature. But Sartre had a very peculiar way of looking at the world. One of the things that Jean-Paul Sartre was famous for is this idea of freedom, in which he talks about the individual is always free. Okay? And he says that the individual always has the capacity to emancipate himself from whatever. Okay? And Sartre even said that when the individual refuses to accept that he is free, that he is in control, this individual is in bad faith, or what Sartre called mauvaise foi. Okay? Now, this idea of mauvaise foi sort of jive with the notion that the individual is free, because since you have freedom, okay, you have the capacity to emancipate yourself, and when you don't do that, it is a choice that you make. In other words, you are the one who decide to remain in bondage, whether it's a physical bondage or is a spiritual bondage or maybe a mental bondage. Okay, I disagree. I completely disagree with that view, and that's why, even though I have attempted in numerous times to defend Jean-Paul Sartre, I do not share his views. And like I said, my philosophy is somewhat the opposite. In fact, I believe there's no such thing as freedom in society, not even in nature. There's no such a thing. When you speak of freedom in either society or nature, it's a fallacy. Okay? Because if we were to define the word itself, the word free, which means being emancipated from, okay, it's a concept that does not exist neither in nature nor in society. In the book Cogito ergo philosophus, Je pense donc je philosophe, I sort of talk about this in terms of how the human being, or the being, is sort of anchored in nature, and there's absolutely no way for the being to be free from his beingness, or in this instance, its beingness. Okay, so at the end of the day, the being is not free to be. Rather, the being is free to acknowledge its beingness. The being could refuse to acknowledge its beingness. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that the being is not being. In other words, you could deny that you are a man, but that doesn't mean that you're not a man. Okay? And it doesn't necessarily fall into the realm of bad faith, because it is not your choice to make. So I will talk about that in more detail in other recordings, but let's keep it at that for now. Sartre was despised, and I would say for not the good reasons, although I have tried to defend him, but I do not share his views on certain things, especially on his notion of human freedom. Nobody is free. There's no such a thing in society. And so at the end of the day, everybody is under control, whether nature controls you or society controls you, or both. So at the end of the day, you are restricted, you are limited, and to that extent, the notion of freedom is somewhat it's a fallacy.